Call to order the July 1st regular meeting of the Urban Renewal Commission, Oregon City. Thanks for being late. Now what do we do? Let's have the let's go around the room and introduce ourselves.
Brian Jaw, Urban Renewal Commissioner.
Alice Norris, Urban Renewal Commissioner.
Rob Trucker, Urban Renewal Vice Chair.
Don Slack, Urban Renewal Chair.
Nancy Walters, Commissioner.
Rocky Smith, Commissioner.
Larry Patterson, City Manager.
Ed Sullivan, City Attorney.
Nancy Ide, City Recorder.
Scott Archer, Community Services Director.
David Wimmer, Finance Director.
Thank you. Do we have any citizens' comments? Nothing? Okay. Future agenda items?
Mr. Chair, it's not a future item, but if you look at this evening's agenda, prior to getting to the contract awards in relationship to the City Hall, you might want to move item 4H up ahead of that. It does, I think, answer some questions that have come up. And I'm waiting for a couple more gentlemen to, or at least one more gentleman to show up this evening, too, that should be able to help us with that. And I think by the time we get through the grant application process and those things before it, hopefully he will be here as well. But, that is, if you want to take those issues up.
Yeah, should anybody have any objection to changing the order? Then we'll move that to, let's put it after D. Does that work for you? After 4D?
Yes.
4D?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Minutes, 4A of the April 15th regular meeting.
I move approval.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the April 15th minutes. Any discussion? Okay. In favor, aye.
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 Opposed? And the motion carries. Let's see, how many are we tonight? 2, 4, 8? 0. Grant application process.
Yes.
Mr. Patterson.
Mr. Chair, in your packet, you have a copy of the requirements of those grants. You also should have at your place this evening, I think I sent this to you about a week back as well, a list of the grants, what you have received, what's been approved, what's awarded, and what is pending. And if you look at that list, and I'll update that to you here in just a second, you have received roughly $82.4 thousand in request, and with what has been paid out, or would be paid out if all of it's been paid, and again, it hasn't, you'd have roughly $17,000 remaining. It looks like out of those, and that's for next year, we will pay, looks like $20,000 for this year, so we should have about $37,000 remaining in which we can award in grants for 09.
So the funds from last year will, the excess
we just
carries over?
We just rebudget $100,000. They don't really carry over, but again, those those should get taken care of. But we're going to, looks like a couple of those will get in. We'll get those paid this year, and I've put an asterisk by those. So should have roughly $37,000 left to award in grants, and that's assuming too the one you have on the agenda tonight would be granted. So.
Okay.
Sorry to ask such stupid questions, but 87. We have $37,000 of the 100 budgeted for the period starting July 1.
If you look at what's come in the door, and again, I'll direct you to the list that you have at your place this evening. For 0809, we have roughly $40,000 remaining in that budget. If you look at next year, 0910, you'll see the requests that we have that are pending because we're not anticipating those to be paid next year, but given where we're at today, it looks like the 702 Main Street as well as the 1401 Washington, we will get that information in and get that paid in this fiscal year. So therefore, that would change the $17,500 remaining to $37,500.
It moves it
next
into
year.
this fiscal year, so it reserves
Okay.
more for next.
So if we pay the 20,000, then the budget remaining, oh, that's budget, okay.
Yeah, you'd still have $20,000 there that you didn't spend
Okay,
on that.
all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
I will pose a question just based on that. You say we will have how much out of the, again, if you would, how much out of last year's budget for that particular program?
You will have, if those two grants are paid this year with what has been paid to date, you would have $20,000 that went unspent. Now, again, that becomes part of the working capital carryover, and you have budgeted another $100,000 for next year for that.
Then my question is, can the commission consider actually rolling that over into the same program?
No, because again, it comes over as part of your working capital carryover, and then you rebudgeted $100,000. And as you recall, with where we're at, I think we only have about $5,000 in contingency. So,
Yeah, okay.
in addition to that, I should mention that the criteria that you have, as is indicated in your staff report, are basically guidelines, because one of the rules that you have there is that you may waive any condition or requirement. I think in general, and these have been around, I think were adopted somewhere back in the early 2000s, I think. But I think what you're looking at is looking at requests that improves the aesthetics, I would say the citizen experience of downtown, or the curb appeal of downtown. So I think you have to kind of look at these grants in regards, does it accomplish those tasks? And if so, then is it worthy of some type of matching grant that you wish to award? If you would like to tighten those guidelines up and be specific, you can do that. I think that kind of ties your hands if you get a good project that doesn't necessarily fit neatly in there and limits you somewhat. But I think really the goal is just trying to improve the appearance of the structures in downtown. That's why it's kind of geared for the outside stuff, and some of the things that are listed there that's not part of the criteria is things that may not improve that curb appeal. But again, it's a fine line to draw, and it's hard to write guidelines about everything that may come up. So,
Do you have any questions, or Commissioner Norris?
Just reminding us, I think that these guidelines were given to us or purchased, were gotten through the PDC, so the Portland Development Commission had used these and has refined them, and I think that when we adopted them, we had someone that talked about that. Was that Denise McGriff, who works with these on a daily basis?
yeah.
So we haven't worked with them for very long in this format.
Right.
If they accomplish our goal, I mean, that's important to me. Is it going to accomplish the revitalization of downtown with the look that we want and the quality of standards that we want to achieve?
Commissioner Walters.
I generally support virtually everything that's been before us, and my only concern is that with $100,000 to budgeted to give out, we don't know what's going to come in the door from one week to the next. So I'm trying to get a better handle on how we can target those funds most effectively. And I don't know if there's a different way to do it that would allow us to, maybe when we get to 75% of the budget, have some kind of a priority system. I don't know. I mean, we haven't had a problem so far, it seems like, but it might be the case that we see more and more of these grants, and I would hate to run out of our funds halfway through the year. And is there an reallocation process, or what do you recommend?
It does not appear that there will be. Again, as you recall, the urban renewal budget is fairly defined, and that is pretty tight. So I think there's a good chance this year that you if all we have remaining is $37,000, I think there's a good chance you'll see grant request that amount. I think with the tightening economy, and I think also with downtown beginning to get move forward more, I think you may see more requests coming in than what we can meet in any given year. How to do that in advance, I don't think anyone has a great crystal ball unless you just kind of maybe had a little bit of some type of meeting at the first of the year before you award anything. Have kind of a town hall with the downtown property owners and just kind of indicate here's what we have, and it's a first come first served basis. So if you have something that you're planning, you may want to try to get that ready and get it in the door. If not, you may be waiting till the following year.
Commissioner Neely?
Thanks for calling me. A little joke. Anyway, very little. Anyway, I was going to say basically the same thing. If we've got something in place at the beginning of the budget year, I really don't think we ought to change it, at least during that budget year. If it becomes an issue, then I think at mid-year or something, that's the point to start looking at it. But if there's kind of an expectation on the part of our public that certain monies are available under certain guidelines, we shouldn't change that during the budget year unless we have got a real strong reason for doing it.
Commissioner Norris?
I think Commissioner Walters brings up a very interesting point. On one hand, those businesses who are motivated are the ones that apply. I suppose there could be an education process, but I think the Main Street program is actually promoting a lot of this also. So whether we have a mid-year check or not, but at least next budget year, I think it would be good to talk about what is accomplished, what are the holes we see in the program, and are there some places that we're not able to invest. And I think being, again, a partner with Main Street, because obviously tonight we're going to discuss another innovative program that's sort of an adjunct to this, but we may want to set aside more money next year, maybe for some specific purposes. It is a grant program, so I don't know whether you can really put limits on it, except for saying, we only accept $50,000 the first half or something. But again, we've got motivated businesses that do it, and it has worked well to now. But I agree that maybe we should look at the future.
I think one thing too is I'd hate to kind of clamp things down and then not spend the money, because I'm all for if you've got people coming forward, when they're coming forward and they've got good projects, of moving forward with it. And if you tried to make sure you had enough for the ones that didn't come forward and then they didn't come forward, you've limited the intent of what the program is. Commissioner Neely?
Yeah, actually, it's something that probably should be addressed at the City Commission, but I've been giving some thought. We had some projects coming in. When they initially came into us, they had sidewalks on them, but we were able to reconfigure what was being requested, that we could pull the sidewalks off. We have funded the sidewalks in the past. We do have sidewalks that do need repair, and of course it's the responsibility of the property owner. And this is throughout the city. And I think probably the City Commission on that particular item should perhaps give some thought to perhaps an effective city loan to do those things, and somehow we could structure our utility bill to actually pay for those kinds of constructions. That is, property owner comes up with a down payment of a certain percentage. They perhaps don't have the funds to repair the sidewalk. It gives us a capability, I think, of enforcing that a little bit better. They come up with a certain percentage, and then that particular property has basically a payment schedule on the utility bill to go ahead and cover those kinds of expenses. And that's something that I'd like to have a discussion of. You all might want to weigh in, but it's really a citywide issue.
Any other Commissioner?
I've always had concerns about the sidewalk issue, so I think it's important that we talk about it. One of the things that I have a problem with actually is just if we have a guideline or a criteria that's given to us as an urban renewal commissioner, I'm going to follow that criteria. And if we don't like the criteria, then we need to fix it, or just not have any criteria at all. But if we have a criteria, which we do, that's what I'm going to follow. And I actually think that the way that the current criteria is set up actually makes a lot of sense to me because of issues like sidewalks and roofs and things that people aren't seeing from the street. This is really geared towards visual impacts that are going to enhance the downtown or enhance various places around the community that people are going to see and respond to. And I think that there was, it seems that there was quite a bit of thought that was put into this, these requirements. And so I'd really like to find out, if we as a commission want to use this criteria, then we should probably try and follow it. If not, then let's throw it out and start over. Because as long as I have this is what I'm voting on.
I think, but there is a point in that allows for us to waive or look at some other things. I think that is healthy, and I think the whole concept that we have here is that we're wanting to better, as you say, the things that show. And by the way, sidewalks show. Some of the impacts that we have from people who have not been in our downtown and show up and give us feedback. Our sidewalks are very much of a negative in the downtown area. But all I'm saying is I think that if you're going to follow the policy, then the policy does allow for there to be exception, the way it's written. So.
My concern with the sidewalks is just a consistency thing, and we have numerous citizens time after time coming to us concerned about the fact that they're responsible for replacing their sidewalks, and then in the same night, we after telling citizens that they're responsible for their sidewalks, we then award money to pay for sidewalks and for other businesses or property owners, and I think that sets a really bad precedent.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that they are a part of the appearance of downtown.
Sure.
Because you made the statement that we should do things that are just a part of appearance, and they are. And I think Commissioner Neely probably has a good suggestion of how to take a look at it from a citywide perspective. So,
A couple of other thoughts you may want to consider, which may help, particularly with the criteria you have that you can waive any of these, is you might want to put a purpose statement on the grants, and again, that purpose would be aimed at improvements of aesthetics or the citizen experience in downtown. Again, that curb appeal, if you had that, then if you had one that may not fit neatly in these criteria, it may give you some basis then for why you would waive that criteria.
it gives you an umbrella that, of whatever. Does everybody feel,
I like that.
could we draft something for the next meeting that
Yeah, I like
would be an amendment to that policy?
Sure.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's move on to, where are we at?
4C.
4C.
Yes, this is a request from the Main Street program for a downtown sign fund, and Mr. Purdy is here and can answer questions in regards to it. They are applying for a grant match. They're asking for $13,333, which does exceed your $10,000 limit, but that's because they do have a state funding award, and they're trying to match that state funding award, as I understand it. It would create a sign fund for the Main Street program that would provide incentives to property owners and businesses to upgrade or their existing signs, install new signs, or address some of their awnings in the downtown. If you look at the criteria, I think it may not fit neatly in these, but I think it meets the intent of the criteria. And in this situation, by providing that to Main Street, you would be forming a partnership with Main Street to assist with some of this improvement of the downtown aesthetics, if you will. So with that, Mr. Purdy's here. I think he can answer those questions probably better than I can.
Does anybody have, did you want to say something, Lloyd?
Sure, thanks for the offer. The good news is, in fact, just yesterday we announced that we did receive $14,000 from the city.
Put your microphone on. Pull it, maybe
should
pull
be
it
a little-
closer.
Yeah, state your name and the organization.
It's not on.
Turn it on.
There's a thing on it.
Here you go. Thank you, Larry. Hi, I'm Lloyd Purdy, the downtown manager. As I was saying, and I'll repeat real quickly, the good news is just yesterday we got to announce, and I can share the media release with you all, that we received actually $14,200 from the state, recognizing the good work this community is doing in historic preservation. The money is earmarked for facade improvements, specifically tagged at sign improvements and awnings if people wish, so some really targeted interventions. The one drawback to the state money we got, and the reason I'm coming aboard to this commission to ask for some matching funds, is that $14,000 from the state can only be used on 43 properties downtown that are historically significant or eligible. Well, there's about 200 properties downtown, so this only applies to a small subset of downtown. That's a good group, but I'd like to ask the Urban Renewal Commission to help us hit a larger target audience with a close to a match on that funding, so that we can extend this program, a sign program, to the other 100 and something commercial properties that might want to improve their signage or better awning. So it's really an incentive program. It would be a match up to $1,000 after the project has been completed. So that's the intro.
Commissioner Neely.
A couple of questions. Well, one's a question, one's a concern. You mentioned historically significant buildings. I don't think on our local inventory, I don't think we have very many other than those that probably are on the National Historic Register. Most of our local listings are residential. And are there other bases? I presume they have other lists. Somebody, SHPO or somebody else has other lists besides our own local inventory that you're going by.
Button I push?
There you go.
On now? Great. Commissioner Neely, thanks for the question. Because Oregon City became a Main Street performing community, we did receive an updated historic inventory specifically targeted at downtown. We've got 47 properties that are eligible contributing. They could be considered eligible because they contribute to the historic character of the community, and 15 properties in downtown that are eligible significant. So those are two different categories. You're right. There's only, I think, a handful of buildings downtown that are actually on the historic register, but we've got 50-something that qualify for this program the state's helped us fund. And of that number, 60-something, this program is tied specifically to or targeted specifically at the commercial properties. So we do have a different list than just that historic registry list.
The other thing is a concern that you might be able to address. We have the guidelines here, and of course you've got criteria as well, apparently, in terms of what you can fund. What mechanism are you going to have to make these decisions?
Good question, and I'll share with everybody here that wants one the draft concept of what we'd be sharing with property owners, so that they know what to expect out of this program and they know what to do for this program.
May I ask a clarifying question, please? Okay,
Commissioner Norris.
so you got more money than you asked for, right? $14,200. And so are you asking for that to be matched? So is your new ask 14.2?
I think it's simplest just to keep with the original ask.
Okay.
We only found out about the additional a couple days ago.
Right, well, I didn't know what we, okay.
If you'd like-
I just wanted to know our guidelines here.
Right.
Thank you.
The original ask-
Interesting that the state gives you more than they were promising. So.
Well, one poor community couldn't come up with a project, so we got some of their take.
Commissioner
Kudos to
Neely.
us for coming up
I
with
was going to ask a question a little differently. Do you want to reduce your amount by $1,000 at your request?
Sure.
I'm sorry I called on you, Commissioner Neely. Commissioner Crocker.
So I have a question. If the state requires that these funds are used on historically significant buildings,
Just the state money.
right? And if we were to match the funds, let's say all you get is people with buildings that don't match that criteria, does that mean we would have to give some of that money back to the state?
Yeah, any unexpended fund balance that we've gotten from the state to Main Street, Oregon City, so of this $14,400, whatever we don't spend toward historic buildings, yeah, at the end of the year, by anything we don't have committed within the next 60 days, we've got to send that money.
So, if I get this right, basically what you're trying to do is get a match to get a lot more people involved and interested in actually doing something for their awnings than saying, well, I can't qualify anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right. We're limited to 43 buildings if we just use the state's money. I wanted to take that state money and target those 43 property owners, hence this draft concept we've come up with here. With some urban renewal match, I can then target a larger audience, get more good properties, more properties updated with better signage.
So what happens if you only get a total of $6,000 worth of applications to urban renewal? What would happen to that money then?
The money coming from urban renewal?
Right.
If we give it back, I imagine would be the right scenario to do.
Okay.
Maybe we do a different timeline on it, but maybe not. It's up to this group certainly to say, well, Lloyd, if you don't expend it by the time the grant agreement with the state goes up, the money also comes back. That's a very appropriate scenario.
Commissioner Smith.
Just so I wasn't here at the last meeting, but this was I read through the stuff at that we were going to address at the last meeting before we moved it to here. We're actually you're setting up a separate fund, so people will be making requests to Main Street, Oregon City, right? Grant requests to you. Okay, so the effort, and I highlighted, in order to reflect historic significance or character of downtown architecture, which I think is, what we all want to do. That's a really broad statement, and it's even for people that really know Oregon City history. How do you determine whether or not a sign fits the historic character of downtown? And the only reference that I even can see to how to define whether or not it fits the historic character is whether it's a lit sign or not. That seems to be really, really broad. Because you could have a hand-painted sign or a metal sign or any of the signs that are listed down there that still wouldn't fit the historic character of downtown. So I don't think it's specific enough to address. If you're going to be very specific in saying that you want the signs to reflect the character of historic downtown, I don't think there's enough here to do that.
May I answer that?
Yeah, please.
Commissioner Smith. That is a good question. There's two parts, two answers, two ways we go about addressing that concern. The simplest, but for you the least edifying answer is Main Street, Oregon City has a mandate for historic preservation downtown. We work with that as our focus in our economic development issues, in our marketing issues. We even have a subcommittee, and some of the board members here sit on those committees, to address design and historic preservation downtown. So one approach that we're going to use here is invite a task force within our design committee to help review any applications that come in. So there'll be almost a peer review of signage to make sure that it is appropriate. So that's one way we make sure we're getting the right quality level of signage. The second issue we've worked in, because this is an incentive program, and my feeling is with an incentive, we're giving a little more, but we're going to ask a little more, is that we can put some restrictions on what type of signage goes up as regards to the materiality. In a historic downtown, you want to see authentic material, brick, stone. Truly, you want to shy away from plastics and things that are less authentic. So one characteristic of the signs we want to incentivize are seeing signs made of metal, signs that are hand-painted, signs that are made out of wood and not plastic. So we've made some minor, within the page 3, probably top paragraph, we've made some minor suggestions about what we want for the sign. But what it comes down to is what I've already done with a couple of sign makers and a couple of business owners. We will walk around downtown. We point out what is good and what is not, what we do want to see. So we give visual examples as we're walking around downtown. And then it comes back to me for review that I give to a design committee to double check. But we are looking at, primarily to address your question, authentic material. And let me tell you why we can only do that, why that's a limit to our approach here. Think of a Subway, a U.S. Bank, a franchise, a chain that's downtown. They're tied to the colors they can use and the logoing they can use on their signs. We can't tell them what they can or cannot use on their signs. Much like other places like the Verdict. They have their brand, they have their logo. We can't tell them they can or cannot put their logo up, but I can certainly encourage them to use the right material when they put up their sign, to do good lighting and not do a backlit sign that isn't keeping with a historic character. So it is loose. I certainly agree with that. We're doing our best we can to provide some incentive money to take one more step forward and tighten things up, make it a little higher quality.
Commissioner Shaw, did you have?
Yeah, I guess this is normally a 50-50 grant, and we got $14,000 here, and normally we'd be looking at $7,000 up to $10,000.
Well, but this is the actual grant that's going to the user is not the $13,300, and then that's going to be a 50-50
We'll
grant.
still match
It's going to be a match on the.
I'm still going to require the property owner or the business owner that wants an improved sign to match dollar for dollar.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just asking for the funds that I can tap into when we need to.
It's kind of a clearinghouse to upgrade the signs in the downtown, but Commissioner, I'm sorry. Go
The
ahead.
only thing I'm worried about is kind of setting the precedent here. You know, that we're kind of going beyond our normal mode here, so that's the only thing I'm worried about.
Commissioner Neely, you.
Yeah, I presume it would have to do with only the things that are on our own historic listing. But do signs have to clear the Historic Review Board? Do we know that? I mean, it's exterior, so. Well, except you might have some buildings that are actually on that are on our local inventory. Well, you say one, and I assume that I think that's the only one I can think of. But do we know that for a fact? Is there more? We got several people that are on Historic Review Board or have been.
I believe there's only one in these.
Okay, there's only one.
That's national.
And I know that. I realize that. I don't know if it's on our local inventory because it's on the national or not.
Okay.
Well, the point I was going to make actually was in reference to the comments that Commissioner Smith was making, that if in fact they have specific guidelines, Historic Review Board, you might want it regarding signage, and it's almost all residential, so it may not apply, but you might want to take a look what their guidelines may be. Some of the point is that some of our local inventory, so-called residential, in fact, are used for businesses. That is, they're houses that have been converted to business use, but they still have to meet the Historic Review Board guidelines. And that might kind of give a basis as to the adoption of some standards that might be used. But the other thing, do you say this has to be done in 60 days for the state grant?
From the state side, I need a commitment from 14 property owners within 60 days that say they want to buy into this project. Yeah, I got to move fast, though.
Commissioner Smith.
My first thought was to have this fit still under urban renewal storefront grants and broaden that criteria so that they would, that grant requests would come to us for signage. But I understand that it's a match with the state, and that's probably why you want to have a separate thing, because you're matching those together.
I think one thing we should be clear about is the state does not require a match. Like sometimes you have to have a match on money. What Lloyd is trying to do is expand the money that he has from the state to a greater, because it's limited to certain storefronts. He's trying to expand so we can do more downtown of the similar kind of thing in a program.
Right,
So.
and I understand that, but we don't have control over what sign is going to get the grants, and it's urban renewal money. So we don't know once we give this money over what signs are going to be, because it's under Main Street that decides. So I just want to be more comfortable that we're funding signs that we're okay with as a group. And I don't know that we really know that yet. So I was kind of in the beginning more comfortable with the thinking that if we allowed grant requests to come to us for the funding that we had, then we could determine what the criteria was for signage and whether it fits what we think is downtown. So that's one concern. I don't think that necessarily just having a committee walking around downtown deciding which signs are good or bad is enough, because as an art teacher, what I think is good is not what someone else thinks is good, and that doesn't have anything to do with historical character or what downtown looks like. So I think if we're going to specifically say historic character, then we need to say specifically what that means and how that's going to be addressed. If not, then let them decide whether it looks good or not, and that's the only criteria. But I have a problem being very specific with historic, because we're not doing a very great job in preserving our history downtown. We're doing a lot of really great, what I would say, renovations to buildings downtown, but we're not restoring them. We're losing our history downtown. And so if we're going to say specifically historic, then we need to say that this is how it meets that. And just saying it's not lighted and it's not plastic, I don't think is enough.
Commissioner Crocker was next, then Commissioner Neely.
I think we could talk about this for hours, but I'm an optimist at heart, but on this particular subject, I think it's highly unlikely we'll get 14 people to step up and actually want to spend the money. I really do, and I think at most I don't think there's any way that we would end up giving out that full amount. So, I mean, we could talk till we're blue in the face about who determines what a good sign is and what isn't, and I think inherently we all know if it's a big, ugly, tacky, backlit plastic sign, no, it doesn't qualify. I mean, we could talk about this forever, but I think if we have a commitment from Lloyd and Main Street that any unused funds would come back, I mean, I think this is a great way to leverage state money. And like I said, I really doubt, just knowing the property owners downtown, I really doubt we're going to get 14. I hope we do. Don't get me wrong. I really hope that we do, but unless anybody else differs with my opinion, anyone, I really doubt we're going to get 14 people to come up and want to spend $2,000 on a sign, which in essence, because this would match up to 1,000, right? So the property owner would have to spend 1,000, and then actually that would be 28 signs, wouldn't it? Because it'd be a total pool of 28,000 that would just have to be matched by 1,000. So we'd have to have 28 property owners. That would be awesome if it happened, but I really doubt it will. So, we can talk forever, but I really don't think it's worth.
Commissioner Neely was next, and then Commissioner Morris.
I'm a bit confused. The money is going to be used for historic. That's total amount of what again?
Can you
Your grant is how much?
The grant from the state we received is $14,000.
14,000. How many buildings do we have?
How many buildings?
Yeah.
That could be applied to 43 properties.
I think you had 60-something in here.
But only 43 are commercial.
Oh, I see. Okay, and 43.
But by the way, you're talking buildings, but you really mean businesses, right?
Commercial properties that would need a...
Because some buildings could have more than one sign.
That's true.
Yeah. But then we would not be contributing to the match for those buildings. I mean, we ought to serve a piece.
Correct.
Okay. I want to make sure I understand that. So they're making up a match to the state funds and not to us. To any monies we give you, that is. I guess, I guess I would say this is a good program. I'm just concerned about the short period of time, and I think you're quite right. But does that mean that we wouldn't give a grant for the rest of the buildings? I mean, there are really two pieces there. And maybe you can't give the funding for the state portion, but that's sort of independent. I mean, it's our commitment we're making a commitment based on you getting fundings from the state, which you're going to get. So I think whether we want to help and whether he can get enough property owners to use up the state money, I think are two sort of different questions. I guess if I were to support this, my question would be, what group of people is making the decisions of what qualifies?
Right. So that's why we have a design committee for Main Street, Oregon City. In fact, half the people at this table have been invited, or at least get the emails about that committee and have been invited to join. That committee is tasked with ensuring good design downtown, and this is one of their programs they can, put some muscle behind. So it's led by a co-chair.
I really feel comfortable, frankly, if we had a mechanism of putting either Christine from our planning department as one of the members.
She's on the committee.
She is on the committee. Okay.
Raise your hand if you're on the committee, please.
So Christine is about on the committee.
Okay. It's well
And I
represented.
see we have some ex-Historic Review Board people on the committee. Yeah, so we got some ex-Historic Review. So one of my concerns was Commissioner Smith's concern, but it seems like we've got some people that could actually look at that particular issue that I would personally feel confident about.
Commissioner Neely, you brought up a good point, and let me ask this question back. Within 60 days, I need to get 14 out of 43 property owners committed to the state funding. Part of my hope was that once that word gets out that they're doing that, we'd see a couple more people coming in. And maybe that's where the funding from the Urban Renewal Commission comes in, not quite on the same timeline.
Yeah.
Maybe not restricted to the same
not
time.
restricted, I'm certainly prepared as a Commissioner of Vice, Commissioner Chair of Vice. Okay, small joke. You guys have small jokes. I do too. As Commissioner Crocker.
Yeah, but nobody gets them.
The Commissioner of Vice points out, return the money at a certain point. I think that's quite appropriate, but maybe the timing and the timeline is a little different. That'd be one request.
I think Commissioner Norris was next.
Yeah, and maybe what we wish to do is match what you get with the first amount, because you do have a timeline on that. But I'm open. I'm open to all of that, because I think. But to me, one of the biggest annoyances of downtown is the signage. I think to get a signage program going will be a huge step in the right direction. There are some signs down there that just inhibit you can't even see the building because they're so visually obstructive. So I'm really pleased to do this. I think detail. I'm very comfortable with the fact that they have to submit a sketch and that they have to have certain general guidelines. And I think the people around the committee are going to be barracudas about quality. So I'm not concerned about that.
Commissioner Nasi.
I just wanted to clarify again about the timing and the mechanism here. The state funds are not contingent upon this body making a match, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then Commissioner Crocker pointed out that he doesn't think that there are that many people that will actually step forward. Would Main Street have a concern if we just use the state money first to see if there is a response and have you come back for the application once the market, as it were, has been tested with those state funds? And if we wanted to, make a grant application like this, we first use the state funding to see what the response is, downtown to this.
This being my second visit to this board and this issue, my executive board would have to insist that I show up and make that ask, and that could happen if that's the way you want to go.
One thing that you do, though, is this is, to some degree, a marketing program. So if you go out there and get people excited, then you've got to come back here and you can't really promise anybody anything. Whereas if you've got these two grants, then you've got something that you can go out and you can encourage people to do something with. But if you get the 14, and the 14 are limited because they have to be in the conforming the buildings. And so, it's pretty hard to market the people that are not conforming with the idea that I've got to go get a grant, and if I'm successful getting a grant, then I can move this forward with you as well. I mean, it's just the point, so. Commissioner Neely?
I've got a question to the city manager. If we made the decision today, would it come out of this year's budget?
No, this is looking at the 09-10 budget, because it's when the grants are awarded.
And is this going to be coming out of the 100,000 that we put forward?
Correct. And that's already built into those numbers I gave you today.
Yeah, okay. And I wanted to say that if that's the case, my preference would be to commit only to 10,000. I mean, that's what we have on a project basis of grant requests from that particular fund. And I really, you're talking about the special case situation and so forth that we've been talking about, and I think in all fairness to any applicants for other purposes that we would keep that maximum.
That is true, but in reality, the max to each applicant is really only $1,000.
No,
I mean,
the applicant
because
to us,
when you get to the end.
The applicant to us is the Main Street program.
That's true, but I mean, in reality, the use of the money is in the way that we normally do it.
I
So.
understand.
Do we have? Are we ready to get down to a motion?
Yeah,
or-
I'd like to make a motion that we do grant Main Street $10,000, like Commissioner Neely had suggested, with the only restriction being that it goes through the design committee, and that I don't think we should put a time commitment on it, other than it has to be spent within the same time constraints of a normal grant application, a grant award, which is they have a year to spend it. Is that right?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, $10,000 grant to Main Street, Oregon City, with the restriction that the design committee will be the final approving authority for all of the signs in this particular sign program, not the state. Well, they will be in the state as well, but do we have discussion? Any more discussion? Will you call a roll, please?
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris?
Aye.
Commissioner Walters?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Crocker?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Chair Slack?
Aye. Yes, that's 8-0. Motion passes.
9-0.
We got one more?
Yeah.
Okay, 9-0. Thank you. Thank you all. Next time, we're sorry we made you wait so long the last time. So.
40.
40.
At your last meeting, you directed staff that the URC wished to adopt city purchasing rules and make those rules for the Urban Renewal Commission. You have a copy of that resolution attached, and I do apologize. I was looking at the agenda today. I noticed you did not have a copy of the code, which is 2.40, and that has been placed at your place this evening, so you may or may not want to act on that this evening, but if you're comfortable with that, that's a copy of the purchasing rules of the city, and Mr. Sullivan, I think, is aware of this issue and can answer any questions you have in regards to it.
Okay, we have any questions? Do we want to go ahead? Does everybody feel like we can look at it tonight, or would you want to wait till the next meeting?
We can discuss it tonight anyway.
Okay. Okay, any discussion? Commissioner Norris.
Well, I think the purpose was the intent of our discussion at the last meeting was that we adopt exactly the same public contracting purchasing policy that the city has. So essentially, there is no difference. We can become familiar with it, I think, probably as we use it. Of course, I think we need to understand it. However, if it's exactly the same, and that was our intent, I move we adopt the approval of resolution UR 09-02, adopting Oregon City's public contracting code consisting of Oregon City Municipal Code Chapter 2.40 and resolutions adopted thereunder as the public contracting code of the Oregon City Urban Renewal Commission.
Second.
It's been moved in second. We have to read this again? Is it? Okay, okay. Any discussion? Oh,
We don't have to do first reading. and
Roll
second
call.
reading, do we?
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Norris,
Aye.
Commissioner Walters,
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw,
Aye.
Commissioner Crocker,
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson,
Aye.
Chair Slack.
Aye. Motion passes 9-0. Commissioner Nacita.
I just want to, since we've approved this, take the opportunity to thank Commissioner Walters for her leadership on this public contracting question. It's been
Thanks
very
for
helpful.
Thanks for being so responsive. I appreciate it.
Okay, we're going to take 4H out of order at this time.
4H, yes. Commissioner Smith and Commissioner Nacita have raised a number of concerns in regards to the City Hall project, so I wanted to try to answer those prior to moving forth with any additional contract awards. I have placed a memo at your place this evening. You may wish to take a few moments to read that. I think that answers questions, and the rest of the stuff with that is just supplemental materials, some of which you have received in the past. Also have several individuals here this evening. Mark Nelson, who is the engineer with Sigma Engineering, who has looked at this building, and actually you have some of the reports that he has provided. Guy Spurb, who is our building official, David Knoll, who is our information systems manager, and Scott Archer, who is Community Service Director, who's overseeing this project, I think can answer your questions on that. You will look, as you look through there will be some questions that may be a bit confusing, such as does this building meet seismic codes? And I think if you look at the issue, this building is sturdy as any building you have in town. It would have to take a specific look like that to say yes or no, and that's why the answer is listed as a no there. But if you read through that, and again, Mr. Spurb can give you a more detailed answer on that, is we feel this building is safe and can withstand any seismic activity we have. Now, again, within reason. I suppose Mother Nature can always throw something at us that it couldn't handle. It doesn't mean that the building is earthquake-proof. I don't know if you can make any building earthquake-proof, and depending on what happens, is you would probably sustain some damage. Again, where the building is located is very strategic, and given the foundation it's built on, which has probably as much to do with how a building withstands that type of event. The building is definitely built on fill material, things of that nature, is going to have a heck of a lot tougher time in an earthquake than some built on rock. But anyhow, these gentlemen are here. I think they can answer any specific questions, and we can go through any of those questions on that material that you may have, but you might want to look through that memo first and give yourself a few minutes to look at that, because there's a lot of concerns have been raised. I think we've addressed all of those. Again, I think it's a good project, but we'll answer any questions you have.
Commissioner Nacita.
I can start off the discussion on this. And a couple of thoughts have come to my mind in reviewing City Manager Patterson's memo. I want to thank City Manager Patterson for the memo. He's obviously been very thorough on this and spent some time on this. I do want to talk about the idea that's come to my mind since we've just been talking about the public contracting code. I used to be a permit specialist for a civil engineering firm, and I did due diligence on stuff like this. As City Attorney Sullivan knows, I did the planning due diligence on the old Oregon State Hospital replacement project in Salem for Westlake Consultants, which was my favorite project with that firm. So this is something I'm fairly familiar with. And stepping back over the past week about the concerns that have been raised about this, one thought that comes to mind is what I'll call a systemic one. I hate to use lawyerly terms, but having bared 3 years of law school, I guess can't help that. And part of think of what may be going on here with the way the concerns arose and I just noticed this in reading the public contracting code, is that I don't know that we have within the city code section any specific provisions relating to requirements on the city's part to undertake specific due diligence when purchasing real estate. Do we have anything like that in the code?
No.
And not in the public contracting purchasing code, it doesn't.
No. And of course, real estate is seen as unique, so you don't have to deal with that. But when you have buildings on it, then there's an issue. There's certainly on the staff's part a duty to make sure that they advise you correctly and that you're getting what you're asking for.
Yeah. Mr. Patterson notes in his memo that well, let me just go to the various memos. It's been pointed out that this issue of whether the City Hall would be an essential facility didn't arise until very late in the process during plan review. And back when I was doing something like this as a development permitting specialist, I certainly would undertake that kind of inquiry prior to the purchase of real estate. And I'm wondering if the concerns that have arisen in this process with the City Hall could be solved by proposing to the city attorney to draft a code provision dealing with purchasing of real estate and setting forth for the benefit of staff and all of us what are the due diligence questions that need to be answered in that process before we actually invest taxpayers' money in purchasing real estate. This may be a small issue in the case of the McLean building. Maybe it's not. I still haven't come to a conclusion on that. But I think just as a matter of protecting the public interest on this, whether purchasing procedures for real estate could be drafted and includes specifics on what type of due diligence investigations would need to be done prior to purchase.
If your question is, can we do it, certainly we can. We probably can't anticipate all the issues that might arise. But this is a policy issue for you to decide whether or not you want to expend either urban renewal or city money on that. That's if you give us the direction, we will do it.
Commissioner Neely, what are you going to?
I think it's a fair question. Of course, we're talking about a building that's already purchased, right?
Right. And it's not going to be retroactive, obviously.
Yeah.
But for the next, I think your point's for the next go.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
this almost seems like more of a city commission
Yeah.
issue than
Yeah.
it is an urban renewal.
From my perspective, I think that is true. I think you'd be asking the same thing of the city commission itself. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let me also add to that discussion, though, that you have to be specific on what it is that you're looking for and, again, what fits the building. If the issue has to do with, is this an essential facility, understand that the facility that you're in today does not meet that code, and we're going to have to address that issue as well. Given the city hall functions, doesn't really fall into that category. It's really the police department that falls more into that, or your EOC, and that's an issue whether we move to McLean or not. So even if we had that, I'm not sure that would satisfy the concern that's been voiced on the essential facility issue as well. In fact, it just points out some of the work that we still have to do here.
There are, if you're in this business, I'm certain that there are some, at least, checklist of things that you may say this doesn't apply, but of items that you would go through before you went into the final escrow, actually purchasing a property. And I don't think it's a bad idea for us for the next go-around to have something that is going to bring somebody who's involved in that process back to a point of going through some sort of it could be a generic list of things. I don't think you can be specific, as was pointed out, but I don't think it's wrong. Does anybody else have any other comments? Could we refer this to City Commission for Madam Mayor? Rock, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to give some clarification as to kind of how these questions came up. I was not here. I was out of town, and so when we were talking about some of the urban renewal spending for the new City Hall building, there was concerns that I wanted to ask about, and one of which in my email to you was concerns that I had heard from citizens, one of which is actually on the project team for the City Hall, who was concerned about structural issues in the building and all of that. And I didn't know the validity of those concerns, but when I saw the fact that we were going to be awarding the contract, it was something that I very much wanted to know the answer to before we actually entered in on the contract. I was also informed that there was an upcoming meeting about the City Hall building, and that there was some concerns about the fact that that meeting wasn't going to take place until after the contract had been awarded. That also was a concern to me. At the last City Commission meeting, we were told that that meeting really had to do just with the land use issues and the parking issues. So I called the city manager, actually, and because I wanted to attend that meeting. And so I didn't invite myself. I called the city manager and let him know that I was wanting to go to that meeting. I attended that meeting, and the meeting that I thought I was attending was going to be about the parking lot, and it wasn't. It was about the fact that we were going to try to now determine how we would avoid the City Hall building being an essential building, because there was no way financially we could ever get that building to an essential facility. And we were that meeting was going to be talking about how we could avoid that. That was a huge concern to me, because we'd already bought the building. We've already signed off on award the contract. And we were asking questions. Actually, this was the first meeting on this topic. And that really bothered me. It felt like that process was not done in the correct order. I was even more concerned when Guy actually, in a response to Scott's question, the debate really was about the fact that in order for this building to be an essential building, that it would have to not only meet just basic seismic standards, but even beyond that. And that's not something that we're ever going to be able to do with this building. So the response to that was actually from Guy, who said, I can't say that it even makes basic seismic standards, and he also said he didn't think that he couldn't say that it even met the code. And that concerned me even more. There was concerns from the police department and the fire department about redundancy issues. There was concerns voiced by Guy about the fact that if a water pipe breaks in the basement, that basement would become a swimming pool, and that there would be issues with the computer stuff that we were planning to put down there. And those changes then were requiring possibility of change requests and change orders that were part of my concern in my email from when I was gone. And so these were all the things that were talked about this meeting, and that really concerned me greatly, because we were stuck. We have already bought the building. We've already done all this stuff. And so immediately that afternoon came up to City Hall to not talk to anybody at staff, but to talk specifically to our city manager, who had left for the day at 3:30. Came back the next day on Friday. He was not here on Friday, so we made an appointment to meet with him on Monday morning. And so Monday morning we had a conference with the city manager to ask some of these questions. The city manager couldn't answer a lot of the questions, and so Scott Archer was brought in towards the end of the meeting. And some of those questions still weren't answered to my, to my comfort level, and so it just really, it really concerns me. I think that a lot of the questions have been answered now, it wasn't so much. It wasn't so much, I guess what really bothered me is, why are we doing this now? Why did we wait until we'd already bought a building, already awarded a contract, to be asking these crucial questions? And that is unbelievable to me. We've commented about the fact that this building has to meet certain standards within the next 10 years. Well, we understand that. This building's been grandfathered in. So we have to deal with that. But part of dealing with that should have been, okay, when we start buying facilities, when we purchase a building for $3 million, how does that building get us towards meeting some of these standards and goals for the future? Well, it didn't. So we have bought a building for $3 million, but we're essentially going to be dealing with the same problem. You'd think that after buying a building, that we'd be at least making some effort towards meeting those requirements for the future. So I have a really hard time. I have a hard time alone seeing us spend urban renewal money on a building that is not going to generate taxes. But in addition to that, these new concerns, I cannot vote for anything in support of the new City Hall building or any finances towards anything that's going to go into that building. Absolutely not. And I just cannot do it. This is something that should have been looked at beforehand, and I am very uncomfortable with the fact that we're having our city taxpayers pay for this building that is not going to meet the requirements that we need.
Mr. Patterson.
Yes, I have to respond to a lot of that because I think it's kind of overstating the issue, and if you go back and look at the history. Let me first say just as a couple of things. On Thursday at 3:30, I attended the Wastewater Partners Committee, which didn't adjourn until 6 that evening, so I had not left the building early. And on Friday, I did play in the Chamber Golf Tournament, which is a community event. But beyond that, again, as you recall, when we looked at this building, we looked at it for two particular uses, the library and City Hall. We bought that building at the time as a shell, which we discussed, with looking then at which one we would use that for. Neither one of those operations is a critical facility. Again, this is a section in state statute that requires that. It's something we're going to have to address, whether we stayed here or we didn't. We did, in purchasing that building, go through due diligence to look at that building and its structural stability, and we have these gentlemen here that can testify to the fact that that building is probably as stable as any building that you have in town. As you recall, and again, the ideal situation, and I've mentioned that to you many times, that this facility or this building is not the ideal fix, but it is a fix, particularly in view of all of those facilities and the other needs the city has. How do you do that within the resources that you have? Because you can't take all of those measures, package those, and go ask the voters for more tax dollars to fund those things. You have to figure out a way how we're going to pick those off and go through that, because besides just the facilities, you have a number of operational issues that have to be addressed as well. So this takes us down the road further. It does get us, as we begin to look at this facility, for police operations, the ability to fix it for those operations, and that's not an easy price tag either that we're going to have to fix. If we did move City Hall out of it at some time in the future after doing that, we'd probably look at additional dollars to address that issue. The building that was purchased, we did look at the structural issues. We had the owner fix more of that. As we go through this renovation, we will look at it as well. And as you will see from the memo, if you look at that, there is a good question that this building very well may meet seismic standards, but again, we'd have to go through and look at that to see. Most of the buildings that you have in Oregon City that was built prior to 1972 probably do not meet today's codes. So you're going to face that with any issue if you're purchasing a building with the purpose of renovating it. I wouldn't go as far as say this building could never be built to the standards to make it an essential facility, but that does come at a cost, and that's something that it would be a needless expense for this facility at this time, and that's why staff met and did this. I would take issue, too, with the issue that Mr. Smith did invite himself to that meeting. Again, he came in and asked, and I said I don't have any objections, but I'm not going to object to any commissioner attending a meeting if they wish to do it, because if not, I'd get more of the charges we're trying to hide something. The question is that an appropriate role for an urban renewal commissioner? Because in this case, it has taken 2 days of my entire time to put this together, as well as a number of other folks, which we're spending some money this evening for them to be here to answer these questions. It was quite a disruption, both on Thursday and Friday, to a number of members of staff, as well as one applicant for a job. So, again, I think there's a way to do things, there's a way to not. Hopefully this answers the question. I still think this is a good project. I think it is a safe structure. I think it will serve the needs of the city. It's going to take some creativity in the future. But again, if this is something that the Urban Renewal Commission sees as an issue and doesn't want to go forward, we'll back up and try to find a new approach to this.
Do we have any other questions or comments on the memo or this particular agenda item?
I
Commissioner
move
Neely.
to approve. Having heard none. You want to call for the motion?
I don't think we need. I think it's just
background, Joe.
Okay.
I do need to mention one other aspect of the building that we will be looking at. It is not necessary, but I think it is the right thing to do, and that has to do with the parking lot. I know the neighborhood has raised some concerns, as well as the our own departments, and looking at it has to do with the entrances off 7th Street. What I've asked Scott to do is look at design of the parking lot different. They will close the entrances off 7th Street. They'll make some bioswales along 7th Street to make that more of a, I can't think of the terminology, but for lack of a better term, it makes it more environmentally sound in doing that. We'll lose a couple parking spaces in doing that, and the circulation or the entrance, ingress and egress to that parking lot will be off of, is that?
Center.
Yeah, as well as, I guess you could come into the alley there as well. That will involve some additional cost for that parking lot, and I don't have those figures as of yet, but that's an issue that we'll be bringing back to you.
Commissioner Shaw.
I guess we have the engineer here this evening. We might as well, if I could ask him a question, I guess, if you want to step up here too. So, I'm just kind of curious because in my design work, I do mostly residential stuff, but every time I apply for going for permits and stuff, it's all has to have a seismic study done on it. And, now you've evaluated the building. And has there been any kind of seismic study done on it yet, or is that going to be part of the architectural drawings, and they're going to have to apply for a permit, and it's going to be looked at in a seismic condition? And so is there any seismic activity or any seismic structural components going to be used in this building, or is it just existing?
Basically, I'll clarify.
Would you state your name, please?
Mark Nelson with Sigma Engineering.
Thank you.
I'll just clarify my role real fast and then answer that question.
Okay.
I was contacted by Scott to do a quick cursory walkthrough of the building, to look at the structure and identify any issues that I saw that would raise issues in purchasing it. My role was,
You might need to pull that mic closer.
My role was basically a walkthrough. We did not do any formal structural calculations. We did not do a formal FEMA type evaluation where you do check sheets and submit a formal report. It was a little more informal, just to go through the building and find out if anything obvious popped out. Now, to answer your question, the building had they were weren't quite completed with some major tenant improvements. Another engineering firm had produced, an architectural engineering team had produced drawings for the tenant improvements, and those included quite a few, I would say, structural upgrades to the building. We observed that the whole ground level had new shear walls added, new mini locations, new foundations added. So the building had some seismic strengthening completed to it, and that was a permitted item through the city.
All right.
I was coming in and looking at the building while it was still open. Scott wanted me to see if there was any other issues and that I could see. I've done FEMA evaluations, and I'm familiar with the check sheets, and what those evaluations entail is you look for these triggering items in the building that would bring up a problem. For instance, you have discontinuity in load path. Are the roofs connected to the walls? Are the walls connected to the foundations? So forth. And those are the type of issues that as a structural engineer, we would look at. Did we see anything obvious that looked like it was a concern? And we didn't see those, with the exception of what we identified in the report. There were some masonry chimneys, some masonry walls that were not included as part of the tenant improvements that we felt needed to be addressed if it was going to be used for a public facility. Although we didn't do any structural calculations, some were produced by the previous engineer, and they were completed to the 2003 IBC and 2004 Oregon Structural Specialty Code, which are very similar to the current 2006, 2007 codes.
Commissioner Nocita.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. Would the standards by which such an you're talking about the FEMA checklist.
Right.
Under what circumstances are those requested? Are they requested typically for an instance like this when a building is going to be used for a public civic building? When are FEMA checklists requested?
That would be typically when I've been involved with it, that is a requirement requested by the client. In other words, the city would say, these are the steps that we want to go through. What level? Basically, we would do it when we were asked to do that, unless we would make a recommendation to say you need to do this.
Are your clients typically municipalities?
Yes, I've varied.
So on similar jobs, have you been requested by municipalities to do the FEMA checklist?
Yes, I have. Some buildings that hasn't been requested, some buildings that has been requested. It's.
But we didn't request it here, of you at least.
No, not this.
And
not this particular building.
the previous one didn't get a FEMA checklist because they weren't really, the previous owners and the engineers involved then weren't foreseeing use as a public facility like we are now.
I can't speak for
Sure.
them. All I can say is that when you look at the design criteria on the drawings, they were the type of occupancy that they defined was typical office space. So I can't answer that, but I can say that it was that they upgraded it to the standards for typical office space.
Okay. How much more expensive is an inspection to the standard of one of these FEMA checklists?
As compared to what I did?
Yes.
They're much more involved. We did, it was a minimal effort. It was a 2 or 3 hours of site visits and follow-up report. So we're in the neighborhood of $500 to $1,000. A formal FEMA report would probably be in the neighborhood of $3,000 to $5,000. There's a lot more formalities that you have to go through, and the report's more comprehensive.
Okay. So I guess I'd turn the question to Mr. Archer and Mr. Patterson is, why didn't we have the full FEMA checklist requested?
My honest answer is I wasn't familiar with that process. So this was, I've never bought a city hall building before, or whatever. But
So I guess
to add on to that though. we did ask Mr. Nelson to do a structural engineer's review of the building to make sure that we felt that it was sound for the types of use. We also, I know this isn't exactly what Mr. Nelson does, but we also had, just to show the level of due diligence that we did take, we had a complete environmental analysis of the facility done, which was very detailed. I think they produced about a 300-page report because there were concerns about potentially things that had been there because it was a medical clinic for so many years and so forth. So we probably didn't think of everything, but we thought of what we knew of, and we did the best we could.
I think more specifically, we were trying to determine, was the building structurally sound? And given what Mr. Nelson did, as well as the recent review that it had had, we felt that this building was sound enough for the intended uses we were looking at.
Is this July 11th, 2008 letter your report from your walkthrough?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And subsequent to this, you've done the structural analysis that Mr. Archer just referred to.
No, that was prior to that. I'll clarify that. The report was based on his analysis. Is that what you're asking, Commissioner?
No, the structural analysis was done after July 11th, 2008?
For the tenant improvements?
No, for our project as a city hall.
Any structural analyses were for the city hall must have been done after this. I was not involved in that. I don't know.
Who's the engineering firm that did the structural analysis?
I'll clarify that. No, Mr. Nelson, the letter that you were provided was Mr. Nelson's report from his structural analysis that he did for us. So the report is provided after he did that structural analysis. Is that?
So this letter is not from the walkthrough that you did, in other words?
Yes, that letter is a result from our walkthrough. Correct.
Okay. And there's a structural analysis, a formal engineering structural analysis of this building for the purposes of making it into a city hall as well?
Not to my knowledge, no.
This report that you have there is what we went back to the previous owner in terms of things that had to be repaired. As we work with LRS Architects, they have a structural engineer that's working with this building on this.
That's correct.
I think you've made your point, and I think maybe in the future.
I haven't got all my answers yet. I'm wondering. I just want to get clear if there's ever been a structural analysis that substantiates this building's capacity to be used as a city hall.
That is part of the work that is going on now with the renovation.
That should have been done a long time ago.
Well, and I'll back up, and I'll call on Mr. Spurb to talk about the structural integrity of this building, if you would like me to do that.
Well, and I'll also add again, as part of the question that we posed, Mr. Nelson, was we discussed a couple of potential uses. One was a library and one was the city hall. And we asked him the question, can this be used for those two types of uses in his opinion? And there were some questions and concerns about the loading on the second floor related to the library because of the weight of the materials that you would put up there, and that was discussed. But my recollection of our conversations, and I'm not looking at the letter at this moment, Commissioner Nocita, but is that basically, and Mr. Nelson, maybe you can tell me if you recall this, but basically his assessment was this is an appropriate building to use for a city hall in terms of the structure. Is that correct? This has been a year ago almost since you did the analysis. So.
For those uses, intended uses that we discussed, yes, and that was our evaluation was based on that. For those uses, would this building, does it appear to meet those requirements? And it did, with the exception of the items that we noted for those occupancies.
Commissioner Neely?
Well, two things. One is that I'm going to assume that it's meeting the structural requirements for general office space, it's probably meeting the structural requirements for City Hall, because those are offices. I would like to hear from Guy Spur, because I think the issue that's coming up in terms of a FEMA checklist are pertinent. I mean, we're getting warnings all the time about the potential of a major earthquake up and down the Pacific coast that would affect the Pacific Northwest, and I think that's something that we have to discuss, and maybe Commissioner Shaw has mentioned that he has to do things when he gets residential stuff done in terms of FEMA requirements. Is that true?
It's not FEMA, it's seismic.
Seismic.
Yeah.
I think probably Mr. Spurb is in the best position to talk about what the previous owners did in terms of the permitted requirements, and I think would be benefit for us to hear from Mr. Spurb on what we saw from the previous owner.
Okay. Okay.
For the record, my name is Guy Spurb. I'm the City of Oregon City Building Official.
And my request was, apparently the permitting process was gone through by the previous owner for general office use. And could you tell us what that involved, or do you have you reviewed those records?
Well, that permit came in a number of years ago. That project had actually been going on for a number of years before the city expressed any interest at all in the building. And when it was permitted, it was done so as a shell renovation. The shell remained the same, and for an interior renovation for a future tenant use. So we could not specifically review it for any particular occupancy, because the occupancy at that point was unknown. So it was reviewed as a shell building, and a number of renovations were made, improvements and upgrades were made to that building for the seismic and wind load factors, as Mark indicated. So,
It was suggested that the evaluation was done by the previous owners in terms of a general office use. Can you respond to that?
that's correct. We assumed when we reviewed it, since it was in a commercial zone, that it would be used for commercial office use.
And so it's done by a shell, but used for, you still haven't been able to, can you make a statement in terms of its whether it would meet our requirements in terms of general office use, even if you were looking at it as a shell?
Yes, I can. I mean, that's what we reviewed it for under those capabilities, keeping in mind that before occupancy of that building, we would need to have plans submitted for the tenant improvement, and then at that time, we would do further fire and life safety reviews on that structure.
And that's what will occur in this process?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, Mike, I'm going to pose the question, can the, if we request a FEMA review in terms of a checklist, can we do it at that particular time? Or is this something that has to precede that?
I've never done a FEMA checklist, so I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Commissioner Nocita?
Mr. Spur, what standards must a building like this meet for a public municipal city hall type facility as opposed to an office building?
As an office building, the same as.
Okay. Now, this question of the essential facilities, where does that come into play in your analysis as a building official?
Okay. This building was assumed to be an office building when it first came in. The plans were submitted to us as a city hall building, and the question came up by my plans examiner during the review of an office building, whether or not the capability there was going to be a server in here, a server room, and whether or not that server would be used for essential communications. Review of ORS 455447 in the clarification of the state definition of essential facilities provides clear-cut requirements of what essential facilities are and their definitions. My plans examiner's questions was whether or not those requirements were going to be or anticipated within this new city hall facility. Some confusion existed between the state ORS requirements and the emergency response requirements as to the definition of essential facility. That is why I called the meeting together. I requested the meeting that Mr. Smith attended to determine what exactly these facilities or what exactly the server room was going to be used for. So it's very clear. I mean, you can have a server room in any building. You can have a server room in the office of your home, and as long as it's not used, or this city hall, as long as it's not used for 911 or emergency response, and there are many, many different types of emergencies other than earthquakes, so I want to make sure that we're clear on that, that it's an office building. It doesn't need to meet that essential. If it meets the essential facility requirements, then there's a seismic upgrade required to the building.
Any other, Commissioner Norris?
When we purchased this building, we expected it would be safe for the public, and it would be secure, and would function as a efficient office building. And I think what you walked in on was a problem-solving session by our staff, which is what they do every day, getting together professionals who determine different directions and how to solve things that aren't there. I mean, I guess, is the building safe? I guess is the question I want answered. I don't hear us talking about that, or I don't hear a negative response to that. I'm looking at the ORS that you quoted, and it doesn't look like that applies to this facility. Are the functions that we want to have there going to? I mean, I think that's what you have addressed in the memo, that we have our mobile EOT unit. This building would be flattened in an earthquake in a minute, but we do have we certainly do have emergency procedures in order. I'm very comfortable with that, and with our mobile unit particularly. The communications can operate anywhere. The facility plan, I mean, are the questions you're asking deal breakers for the City Hall, I guess is what I'm trying to figure out, or are they just questions about other things that we need to do to make it safe? I'm really not positive why we're having the conversation.
Yes, one of my questions is what will it take to make this building seismically adequate for a public city hall? And has that been costed out yet? Or is that what LRS is doing in its analysis currently?
In my opinion, it already does. It meets the requirements of an office building. That's what we're moving into, is an office building.
And the whole
Okay.
city.
Well, in page 1 of Mr. Patterson's memo, it says Guy Spurb indicates the facility does not meet today's codes.
And I can't tell you that it does meet today's codes because an analysis has not been to establish that. Have seismic upgrades and upgrades to this building been made? Yes, they have. But I can't tell you or anybody else, Mr. Nacita, that it meets today's code. I can suspect that it does, but I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it does because I am not 100% certain.
But as we go through the permitting process, that's going to happen, is it not?
The tenant work on the inside probably won't affect the exterior modifications of the building. So I would not request a seismic analysis of this building for the tenant work, for the permit that comes in.
So the issue, and Guy, correct me if I'm wrong, in regards to this building operating as a city hall, it is safe, and unless you want this further verification in regards to code, that's not needed.
That's absolutely correct, sir.
I guess the question is, it wouldn't meet today's code is the question. And what that means is what would happen if it was a different applicant from the city. That is, the shell had been built, it had met the code at the time the shell was built, and a new occupant is coming in, they're going to be doing redesigns. They don't have to meet today's code when they do that?
Not with the existing structures. State law mandates that. If they're building new portions to the building, adding on, then those new portions of the building would have to meet today's seismic requirements. But it's very specific in that you can't, it's not retroactive, that once the code changes, and the code changes every 3 years, doesn't mean that every building in the state of Oregon needs to be upgraded every 3 years to meet current code.
I'm sure I'm correct in saying, I do recall when we did the restoration of the Carnegie Center, there was a lot of seismic retrofits that occurred in that particular building. Now, I presume the original code under which that was built had very different requirements, if any. Was that being brought up to actually present-day standards when that happened? You may not have been the person here at the time. It was quite a few years ago.
Well, it was. I will have been here 10 years next Monday, so there were a significant amount of seismic retrofits done to that building because that building was probably one of the more susceptible buildings in town in that it was unreinforced masonry building, which always tend to be the weakest buildings in a seismic event. But I can't recall, Commissioner, whether it was built to
meet today's codes, or the codes at that time.
Codes in effect at that time.
Yeah.
But I think the seismic increases to that building were because it was a significant building historically that the city went to some extra measures to preserve it.
Perhaps the question that needs to be asked is how would this building withstand a seismic event?
I would say this building would stand up better than probably 90% of the buildings in the city. It's sitting on bedrock. Just in a maybe I can give you a little bit of an example, and it's when I'm very early in my career in this business, a structural engineer for the State of Oregon Building Codes Division gave me this example, and it stuck with me for over 20 years. If you took a 12 by 12, 1 square foot of concrete and put it on the table, and if you put a 12 by 12, 1 square foot of jello and you put it on the table alongside of it, and you hit the side of the table, the concrete block is going to move, and as soon as the table settles down, it's done. But that jello is going to keep reverberating for a period of time. And it's those aftershocks, very similar in a seismic event, that causes the damage. You have an immediate damage from that initial shock, but that back and forth wave action is what really, it's that long-term shaking that really damages the buildings. Okay? If you build a building on fill or soils that are commonly saturated, you reach a point, liquefaction, where it allows that movement. This building is built, it's on rock. I can't tell you how much dirt is underneath there, but for a seismic event, this building is pretty optimally located because it's going to take one shock and then it's going to stop moving.
Commissioner Shaw, did you have your...
Yeah, I think the final, there was always some shear walls, brace panels done by the contractor, already done, to get his permit.
By the previous owner.
Previous owner already did it.
That's correct.
Okay, so, and right now, and that's is qualified to be as an office building.
Yes, sir.
That's already been done.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Crocker.
It sounds like, if I'm not mistaken, the building's safe. We can make it a city hall, and can we move on?
Well, as your building official, I don't have any reservations in that regard.
All right.
And we're not making it a critical space, or we don't need emergency 911 servers in the basement, so I think we can move on.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
If I might.
Commissioner Lee.
It really becomes a question of does, in the renovation of an existing facility, does the city want to set a higher standard than might otherwise be set? And I think that's a question that you could ask. But it doesn't seem that we ought to be asking whether or not we're meeting the requirements for that we'd expect of any other entity in the city to meet. That is, and I guess maybe that's the question you're posing. It sounds like any other person that was renovating a building at that particular stage, they'd be in no different position in terms of our permitting process than we are going to be in. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we're we're not dealing with this in any special way simply because it's going to be a city hall,
Absolutely not.
in terms of the permitting process. And so I guess the question is, does somebody want to put forward a recommendation that we look at something that goes beyond the current requirements that we have simply because we are a city facility and want to set a standard, higher standard? And that might be the question we want to pose, as opposed to somehow we screwed up, because I don't think we have.
What I heard is this building may be better than 90% of the buildings in the city.
And I guess the question I would have, if you met FEMA standards, would they take that into account? I mean, or do they have a single standard that applies to?
My point is why would you want to spend money to be better than that? Commissioner Shaw.
I think you're going to entertain that when you do this building. That's where you're going to really do a higher standard of building than what we're doing down in City Hall.
Commissioner DeCie.
Or hopefully by that time we may build a new facility here.
Commissioner DeCie, did you have your hand up?
Getting to Commissioner Neely's point, given the public trust charge that we carry, I don't think that doing a FEMA checklist, as Mr. Nelson indicated, would be that bad of an idea, because it didn't appear to be, that expensive. But I guess I would put it to Mr. Spur and Mr. Nelson. What would a FEMA checklist process examine that hasn't already been examined?
I can't answer that question. I've never done the FEMA process, so I can't.
Can you answer? Can you return, Mr. Nelson, and help us out with that?
And Mark, you have to pull that microphone next to you there.
Even within the FEMA documents, there are different levels of performance. But if you did the cursory checklist that I mentioned previously, what it would do is just formalize what we did. Is you walk through, an engineer walks through the building and they observe the lateral resisting system of the building, and they check off, is this good, is this bad? If it's bad, what is it? The answer to your question is the final answer may not be a lot of different than what we have. It would formalize the issue, but you would not get any formal calculations. You would just get a checklist that these items were verified.
Which items? Or is
The
that
lateral resisting system, the shear walls, the roof diaphragms, the floor diaphragms, the connections within the building.
Same thing that you looked at.
The same things that we already looked at.
Well, it's just a matter of the report.
It would just be a redundancy, in other words.
Right. Now, that being said, there isn't, if you want to go to the next level, there are some rudimentary calculations that can be done too, if you want that level of check.
And what kind of cost does that involve?
That was the level that I had mentioned, probably the $3,000 to $5,000. And that's just a rough estimate.
Okay. Would either of you, I actually would like to put this on as an agenda item for the next meeting, and maybe, if the commission's interested, ask for a cost estimate on the various levels of FEMA inquiry on this.
Is this holding up any deadlines that we've got?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't hear you.
Well, if we were to put this on the next agenda, and then I guess we'd have to wait for the study to be done once we accepted the study, what's that going to do to the schedule we've got for occupying the building?
I think you got a couple things that you get in. If it results in additional work, that would probably have to be worked before we get into the tenant improvements. The question I think you have to ask yourself, if you get that additional level and it says X, is that an action that you need to take, and at what cost do you need to take that? The building for the intended use question I have to ask, do you feel comfortable enough with that intended use? Will new information, even if it revealed anything, would that result in you wanting to go to a higher level of structure improvements? And what does that, I mean, is it worth the value that that gives you, I guess is the question.
Commissioner Neely?
Yeah, I guess the question I pose is, we go to that higher standard, would the evaluation take into account the fact the building's built on basalt? Or would that be kind of a standard evaluation that would not take that into account if we went to that additional level? Or do you know?
Yes, there is a section within the document that considers geotechnical issues, and the building subgrade would factor into that.
Okay, what does the commission want to do? Do we want to put this on a future agenda item and get a...
Well, actually, if we're going to do that, I'd rather make the decision now, so we're not going to delay another 2 weeks or a month or whatever it is in the decision. I personally would be more comfortable with it. Given the concerns that we hear all the time about the potential of a major event here, I'd feel far more comfortable to have that done.
Well,
And
do we need a motion?
And I would put that as a motion.
You want to make it as a not-to-exceed number?
That's a hard one, but I'll make it a little higher and would suggest not to exceed $7,000.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion to request the seismic, what would the level be that we would be asking for? It's a FEMA level something study?
Well, it's a ASCE 31 seismic evaluation of existing buildings, and that is the base document.
Okay.
That in the beginning of that book, the owner and the retained consultant have to come to agreement at what level they want to perform the review, and then at that point they go through the formalities in the document. But it's hard for me to explain that to you. I don't think we can set that now. I think you're going to have to establish that later. What level, based on that document, the consultant will say this is.
Let me ask you, Mr. Nelson, would you have any reservations putting your own office in that building after it's built out?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
It seems like we're chasing.
Then we have a motion, Mr. Archer.
Chair Slack and Commissioners, I just have an obligation professionally as your staff to let you know, if you ask us to do this, and of course we'll take your direction on this as you wish, it will delay the project. We do have a notice to proceed that's been issued based on your direction at the last urban renewal meeting. We awarded the bid. We had a 10-day notification period to the contractor, which we had to notice to proceed. They are noticed to proceed as of this next week. Any of this type of work will obviously have to put a stop work on this project. That will delay the time of the project, but also it will cost us money. Because when you're working with a contractor, anytime that you delay them by your direction, it will cost you money. I don't know what that amount would be. This is, I can't speak to that, but I'm obligated to let you know that. And then depending on the outcome of that study, if we did that, of course, that could involve significant re-engineering with our architects and our engineers. That will cost money and potential different improvements. So
Okay.
I will withdraw my motion.
No, okay, wait, how do we do that?
There was no second.
There was no...
I second
He
it.
seconded.
I second
He
it.
seconded.
Yep.
Well, I have a couple of responses. When we were going through this, I did take a look at the contract, and there was a provision that we could just withdraw from the whole contract for purposes of convenience. So I'm not sure I agree with that. We could probably refer that question to Mr. Sullivan, but I do recall seeing a convenience clause in there. So I don't really think that we would be bound. But again, that's beyond my experience, and I would defer to Mr. Sullivan on that. Second, regarding Mr. Archer's point about additional cost, should the analysis reveal something, well, that's the whole point of the analysis. If the analysis reveals that there is, in the calculations, that there's something that is of sufficient severity that additional work is needed, that goes back to Commissioner Smith's whole point in the beginning, which was that may have been something that should have been done before purchasing the building. So I'm going to incorporate what Mr. Neely said and Mr. Nelson said about, and I'm going to make the motion myself to have this FEMA analysis done at a level not to exceed 7,000.
Well, let me ask
We
a
already had
question.
it. Wait a minute. Did we withdraw the initial motion, I mean the second? Okay. So we now have a new motion for this, not to exceed 7,000?
That's which is my motion.
I thought you withdrew it.
I did. He's putting
Right.
the same motion?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a second?
No.
Okay.
All right. Let me pose a question. You came to the point of saying at what level? We're not going to do this as an essential facility. What other levels are there?
Well, basically, and I don't have the document in front of me to substantiate, but
No, that's fine.
basically the two main levels are life safety, which the building code's based around. That's what, when you go in to, when you build a home, when you build an office, the seismic levels are life safety. Essential facilities are to fall into a category called immediate occupancy. If that building goes through the seismic event, the building is supposed to be there and be operable after the event, as opposed to life safety. Occupants can get out, but the building may not withstand the force and it may be permanently damaged, but individuals are able to get out of it. Those are basically the two different levels you'd look at. Do you want to achieve life safety or immediate occupancy standards?
I think it would be a life safety as far as I was concerned.
Can we, I mean, we've talked about this for a long time. I just have one thing that I want to add before we wrap it up. And I guess if anybody else has some comment in response, but I've heard from a number of what I consider experts here that tell me they would occupy this space. I've bought a lot of buildings, and I never had the level. I mean, I've had inspections done, and if there was something that showed as a structural problem, I'd go the next level, which is what we're talking about here. We didn't have anything in the initial look-through. And so, I think it'd be a waste of taxpayer money and whatever to pursue this anymore. But Commissioner Smith?
I just wanted to state that I didn't second Commissioner Neceda's motion, partly.
And it died.
Right, I know, but I want to at least speak to why. One, it wouldn't have passed anyway. And second of all, I don't want to spend a dime on this building, and that would be another cent. So I'm not doing it.
Can we move on to...
Let me ask one question, because I think Mr. Nelson was fixing to address a critical point. In regard to those two levels you're talking about, from the life safety perspective, does this building meet that standard?
Life safety?
I believe it does, because it already went through a permitting process in which another structural engineer did calculations for the building and brought it up to the code at that time. There are stamped drawings by a licensed professional structural engineer for those previous tenant improvements, and those levels were to the life safety levels as prescribed by the code.
Thank you very much. Can we move on to 4E? And we're going to need to get done here tonight. We need to get some things done before we get done. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sparrow. Mr. Nelson.
And this is Miss Hyde's issue.
Good evening. Before you is a proposed sole source contract with Granicus.
Did you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry. I'm Nancy Ide, City Recorder here
Well,
in
that was
Oregon
fun.
City. Now I know. This is a sole source contract with Granicus Incorporated for various electronic processes related to the new chambers at the City Hall. This proposal is similar to the one that came before you 2 weeks ago with a few changes, although most of it is the same. It's the same project as far as the individual monitors and the computer devices. The speaking order system and electronic timing device, as well as just launching our electronic paperless packets. But this proposal is a little different in that it gives a 10% discount on the monitors. That's something that the folks at Granicus proposed to us. And it also includes a 15% discount that has been extended beyond the June 30th deadline, which was included in last time's packet, but they gave us an extension of that. And so that brings the total of the discounts to $2,229 less than the previous packet that you received 2 weeks ago. And in addition, through some discussion that we had this week by email with Granicus this week, prompted by Commissioner Crocker's email, Granicus has extended an additional $1,500 discount on the shipping costs. So in essence, the total reduction from the last meeting is $3,729. The findings that are in your packet address the sole source contract. And just briefly, the sole source is allowed by state statute because Granicus is the sole vendor that can provide the services that are compatible with our existing processes. And in essence, it's building on existing technology rather than implementing something new and extracting a lot more costs in the process. So if you have any questions, I'm here to address those.
Commissioner Neely.
We postpone another 2 weeks, will the price go down another $2,200?
No, that was 3,700.
Oh, 3,000. Oh, gee whiz, we'll go down.
Do we have a motion?
I move.
What is the new amount? That should probably be the motion.
The total contract amount will be $43,554.92.
One more time.
$43,554.92.
I move to approve the sole source personal services agreement with Granicus Incorporated in the amount of $43,554.93.
And adopting the findings.
Huh?
And adopting the
And
findings.
adopting the findings.
We have a second?
A second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second discussion. Mr. Nocita.
Yes, I'd just like to say in advance of this vote that when I came in here tonight, I wasn't at the place that Commissioner Smith was regarding an absolute opposition to the City Hall project. I think, however, that based upon tonight's discussion, and specifically also the refusal of the Commission to go that extra mile to ensure the safety of the citizens through a not very expensive analysis of the structure through a FEMA checklist analysis. I have arrived at that point, so I will be voting no on items relating to the City Hall with Commissioner Smith.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Crocker.
I have some reservations about this, honestly, because if we look at urban renewal funds and how they're supposed to be spent, it's for tax increment. And I don't know how spending money on voting systems and stuff is going to help our tax increment. Now, the same can be said about us buying the building in the first place and purchasing furniture. So I'm somewhat mixed, and I think you guys all saw the emails that I sent, and I had some issues with the contract in general. I think it'd be nice for the city to get this stuff, but I don't know. I mean, can we talk a little bit about why we need to do this now as opposed to how do we do it now, and why do we need this now?
Starting it from the beginning, working at the infrastructure level and installing it during the process of the building of the new chambers, rather than having to dig up cement and all those types of things. Installing the electronics, the wiring, while the chambers is being built has a great cost savings to it. So that's probably the greatest benefit right there.
Well, additionally, there's the purpose of this is that when we open the new City Hall building, it's a fully functioning facility, which includes the commission chambers, and this is a key component of that. So if it's not done, and there, as I understand from the site, there's a lead time with this system of approximately 90 days. Is that right for people? So the timing has to do with in coordination with the construction project and having those items ready at the time that the building opens and is completed.
Anybody else? You ready to vote?
Let me add one thing, because I think we lose sight of this, and it has to do with why this facility in this location. Because you're absolutely right, urban renewal and the expenditure of urban renewal dollars has to do with creating additional tax increment. When we began to set the strategy for our urban renewal program, we looked at several areas: downtown, the north end, 7th Street. 7th Street has not been the most active corridor that we've had, but it is a very pleasant street, and there's really no reason why it cannot see the revitalization that you've seen in some other corridors around the Portland area. In fact, actually, it may have more charm than most of them, given the views there. So looking at how do you bring life to a street like that, and one of the things is if you can bring some destination places that brings activity and brings people, is that then adds additional elements, or at least the incentive for other folks to make investments in that street. Likewise, putting an employee base like City Hall at this location not only helps 7th Street, but also provides the opportunity for those employees to more frequent downtown as well, because it's near the elevator and that's a connection to that downtown level. Given the fact of what City Hall is, and particularly with the commission chambers, it becomes a meeting facility that not only the city uses, but can be open for other types of meetings that can bring evening activity to that corridor as well. That helps places like Weatherford's, that can help places like Singer Hill, and hopefully that will stimulate other folks making that investment as well. Overall, for the city, improving the City Hall facility hopefully will bring not only a sense of pride, but also for those folks who look at our facilities may say, Oregon City is investing in itself, maybe we want to invest there as well. Today, you probably have a facility that detracts from some folks making that decision. That's the why reason, and again, if we're going to do it, it's best to make it a turnkey operation and get everything done up front, and that's why these pieces here. Could we live without some of these pieces? Yes, we can. That adds additional cost, more time, and also may make your facility not as functional as what it could be, and that's why all these things are there.
Any other, are you ready for the question?
Commissioner Nocita?
No.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Norris?
Yes?
Commissioner Walters?
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw?
Yes.
Commissioner Crocker?
Abstain.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Commissioner and Chair Slack?
Yes. So that is
6 to 2 to
6
1.
to 2 to 1. Motion passes. Item F. 4F.
Commission Chair Slack and Urban Renewal Commissioners, this is also an item that was continued from the last meeting. This is the recommendation to approve the purchase agreement with Pacific Office Furnishings in the amount of $248,991.38 for purchase and installation of all of the interior furnishings with the new City Hall project. At your last meeting, there were some questions and some additional information was requested by the Commission regarding this furniture purchase. It is recommended via some cooperative pricing agreements that are described in your staff report that we went over at the last meeting, so I won't rehash those again. Since the last meeting, also there was a discussion about the formation of a small subcommittee of some of the members with some staff. Since the last meeting, you've been provided there are a couple of letters that are also included in your packet tonight. One from Commissioner Walters and another one from Pacific Office Furnishings, giving you some I think just some additional pertinent information related to the justification of the purchase and why do this cooperative purchasing. Regarding the subcommittee, that group did not end up meeting. That was by choice of those that were involved. Based on the information that was shared, I think the committee members just decided they did not need to meet. And also, I would add the questions were asked as to whether we could, in fact, go back, similar to what Nancy Ide was just talking about with the sole source purchase, where you can actually go back because it's one specific vendor and you're waiving the public bidding process, and you can negotiate some terms. In this case, we cannot do that, and that was verified in an opinion from Bill Kabizman in our city attorney's office that because of the procurement process and state rules, whether we like them or don't like them, this is the state rule as to this procurement process. That the options before you are to approve this as it is, or to direct us to go back out and basically rebid the project. I think the concern there at this point is some time issues, and also there's not necessarily a guarantee that we're going to get a better price, but that certainly is an option for you. So my recommendation is still to approve this agreement that has been put before you, and with that, I'd be happy to answer your question.
Commissioner Crocker.
Being the one that raised the state initially about prices, I for one do not like state rules and public spending rules. Because I think when the economy sucks, we should negotiate hard. And from my emails and discussions, we found out that basically our hands are tied, which really sucks. But I've come to the conclusion that it doesn't make a lot of sense to go out to bid for this thing because it's been out to bid and they were the low bidders, and we're getting as good a deal as we're going to get, even though I know I could get a heck of a lot better deal as an individual business owner. But I think the other thing I want to say is that we made the decision to buy this building, and I abstained from the last technology thing because I really don't think that's necessary to help bring people to downtown. I understand we have to have furniture in City Hall in order for City Hall employees to be there and frequent the restaurants and draw people. So I will be voting in favor of this. However, public purchasing really stinks.
I agree with where we're at on the public purchasing from the business perspective, but when I thought through this, I think if we were in a different kind of economy, we probably would be tickled to death with whatever, because prices would have significantly risen since this deal was the state initiative. And unfortunately, we're in an unusual economy where we could do better, I believe, than whatever this bid process was if we wanted to go through the process. So, Commissioner Shaw.
Yeah, I think our hands are tied on this one, but when we have to do, I think the Public Works building, I think there's going to be some purchasing probably for that. I think
Yes.
that's going to all be done there. When we do this building, there's going to be some furniture purchased for this. I would like to see us do a little different approach than we had to do for the City Hall building, to see if we can do open bids and stuff and not accept state building like we've had to go through with this.
You're requesting the city commission do it that way.
Yeah, however we want to do it, that we don't get our hands tied with this state bidding thing, that we can actually do open bids.
The reason I mentioned that, I think both the facilities that you mentioned are not in the urban renewal district.
Right, yeah, so if the city commission could do it,
Yes.
yeah.
But the city commission's going to step to the plate?
Hey.
Again, just
Thank
to
you,
clarify, you do have
Could be a campaign issue in a year.
You do have two options here. One is to accept the bids that have been received, which went through the state bid process, or you could reject those and we could repackage this and rebid it. Again, if you rebid it, you're in the same boat in regards to either having to accept the bids or reject the bids. You can't negotiate on those either. So that's kind of the issues you have. We're recommending to you we go forth with this bid package. By the time you repackage it and rebid it, we're going to have a fairly significant savings, or we're not going to gain much because that's a process to go through. And we don't know what those bids will be. There's a good chance they might be lower given the economy, but there's no guarantee that they would be.
Do we have a motion?
I have a motion to approve the purchase agreement with Pacific Officer Furnishings in the amount of $248,991.38 for purchase and installation of interior furnishings associated with the new City Hall project.
Second.
Who was the second?
Is there a second?
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Second.
Commissioner Shaw seconds. We have a motion, a second, discussion. Would you call roll?
Commissioner Nocita?
No.
Commissioner Neely?
Aye.
Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner Norris?
Aye.
Commissioner Walters?
Yes.
Commissioner Shaw?
Aye.
Commissioner Crocker?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Yes.
And Chair Slack.
Yes. So that would be 7-2. The motion passes.
Thank you.
I lost my agenda here. I think we're at the end.
4G.
4G.
Yeah. At your retreat, Commissioner Nocita had proposed a number of policy considerations, and you have a list of those in your packet. You discussed those a little bit that evening, but you asked also they be placed on a future agenda, and they've kind of been rolling over us since we haven't had time to get to those. A couple of those we've taken action on based on your previous direction, the citizen comment period, and the discussion about changing the day. We've talked about starting earlier at the agenda, looked heavy, and again, that's always a best guess. Last time we missed it, so we even started earlier this time, and we're going to be close, it looks like. So beyond that, the rest of them are listed there, and
I have a suggestion that we hold these over to the next meeting and put them at the front of the agenda.
Okay.
So that we're not at the end and passing them by. I think we'll have a better opportunity, a time to discuss some of these items as opposed to.
Yeah, I would agree to that, especially since I want to go get one of those box lunches.
They're not box lunches, but they're good. Everybody else okay with that?
Yes.
It means we're going to hold it on the same day we normally would then.
Is there anything else we need to do this evening?
that's all I have for you.